Hello, I'm Taylor. I'm a doctor of ant brains.
And I'm Philomena. I'm a doctor of stories.
And this is Critterature.
Taylor, episode 1, we're finally here. The much anticipated Starship Troopers episode.
Yeah, we've read this. You read this book a while ago and then reread it for this podcast. I had not read this book until we decided to do this podcast, but I had seen the movie. Now we're both caught up on both things, and we've
Here we
been
are.
avoiding talking about it for like a month now.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
The classic first stage of making a podcast is avoiding making the podcast. I guess we should say briefly what the podcast is. It's a melding of our two areas of expertise in which we talk about stories featuring bugs about bugs that help us answer the question, what the fuck is a bug anyway?
Yeah, what is a bug? What do bugs mean?
So, yeah, we've all seen them. We've perhaps had them crawling on us. But how many of us have asked, what do they actually mean?
Yeah, and they mean a lot in this story.
They do. And this is a good story to start with because I think that especially the movie is perhaps one of the paradigmatic, slimy, gross, fighting against bugs, bug stories of all time.
Yeah, although at the same time, this movie came out weirdly not that long ago.
Right.
It's like 25 years old? Something like that?
Yeah, 1997. So subtract that from whatever year we are currently in, which I don't know.
Who can say?
Who can say, honestly? And the book is much older. The book is from 1959. And so we're going to focus on the movie, but I think the book is so renowned, has such a reputation, not always a good reputation for reasons we'll discuss, but we'll focus on the film and then bring in the book as it goes.
Yes, for comparison and contrast. And the creators of these two works had pretty different takes.
They do. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Robert Ansel Heinlein, aka Bob, because he is such a towering figure in science fiction that I think we'd be remiss not to talk about him a little bit. He was also kind of the person who got me into science fiction by way of my mom, who somewhat ill-advisedly left some of his very sexual, very misogynistic books out for me to find when I was a kid, and it worked. Anyway, so Robert Heinlein lived from 1907 to 1988. He was born in Missouri. He's known for being perhaps the most literary of the Golden Age authors, as opposed to, say, Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke, who are more hard sci-fi people. Robert Heinlein is a little bit more in it for the story, in it for the prose to some extent. He's also known for being kind of a bastard. Misogynist, racist, xenophobic, anti-communist. He famously organized the resistance to Isaac Asimov's open letter among sci-fi writers against the Vietnam War. Bob Heinlein's take was the Vietnam War is fine and good. So that's sort of who we're dealing with here. Does that surprise you, having just read and watched Starship Troopers, that that's the side that Bob would be on?
Not surprising, what a guy.
Exactly. So, and this like resistance to the open letter against the Vietnam War, I would kind of relate to the modern day so-called sad puppies movement, which is a bunch of assholes in an anti-diversity campaign for the Hugo Awards. They were trying to vote in a block, basically against anyone who wasn't a white male fascist, especially against N.K. Jemisin, who just fucking blew them out of the water. Anyway, so that's kind of like the original version of this. I personally have a complicated relationship with him, having read him since I was a kid, but also kind of coming to consciousness over time of how much he sucked. My personal favorites, which I still stand by, are The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah, those are the two that I've read prior to this as well, and I did enjoy them both.
Yeah, I mean, the former is a retelling of the American Revolution, basically, but between the moon and Mars. And the second is basically a Messiah story about a man from Mars. I'm sorry, I meant to say, Moon is a Harsh Mistress is between the moon and Earth, not
Yes.
moon and Mars. That would be something else entirely. The second is a Messiah story about a person from Mars.
Yeah, but weirdly, the American revolutionaries never developed giant cannons that they could use to destroy Britain from orbit?
You know, not that we know of. Release the files. Release the files. What are you scared of? Show us the record. Starship Troopers, though, from 1959, is kind of a Bildungsroman, or a story of someone's formative educational years, but it's a Bildungsroman of like a typical career military officer. Not someone who's outstanding necessarily, except in the sense in which Heinlein pretty obviously thinks that every soldier is outstanding, which we'll get to. In some ways, it's kind of a love letter to discipline, but it's also a bug story par excellence. Like, so many pinchers, so much goo, at least in the movie version, slightly less goo in the book.
It's not really a gooey book, but the bugs are important. We do hear a lot about them, and they are built up as an excellent enemy.
Yeah, and we'll talk about what that enemy means, but the book itself, and to a lesser extent the movie, which we'll talk about, but the book itself is like a deeply fascist story. It advocates a permanent system of military rule in which only veterans have the right to vote. But the fascism is more deeply spiritual than that. I think it's like about an internal self-discipline, self-fascism, to the point of thoughtlessly throwing yourself away for the sake of the state. Ironically, that's exactly what he'll criticize the bugs for doing, even though that's sort of the discipline that he's trying to valorize. So
yeah, it's going to be really interesting to get into it, because I think he draws a lot of parallels between them, but then contrasts them in ways that are interesting.
Yeah.
Because the soldiers are all about brotherhood to an extent, whereas the bugs are pointed out that they will never go back for a wounded comrade.
Right, right. And so, I mean, really, I think the question of this book, in some ways, or our discussion of it, is like, who's more bug-like? Fascists or communists? And is that a good thing? Okay, the movie, briefly, we said 1997. It's kind of a light parody of the military worship of the novel. Director Paul Verhoeven, who also did RoboCop. Taylor, I haven't seen RoboCop, but you have.
RoboCop is great. It's extremely funny. It's an amazing satire. I found this movie, which I watched, I don't remember if I watched it before or after RoboCop. I was warned that it was a satire, and I was expecting a little more satirical content than we ended up getting. It's mostly satirical when we're getting these interstitial scenes that are part of the Federation News Network, I think. Something like that.
Yeah. And
Federal News Service.
It's basically like a propaganda news service, especially about the war against the bugs, but also just in general about how great the military is. It's very campy. It's pretty, I mean, honestly, I think the direction is more of the satire is, perhaps, versus the written adaptation.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting element. And the movie kind of turns it from a Bildungsroman into a more standard Hollywood story and really leads into the bugginess, especially the sliminess element, which we'll get to in our ratings at the end.
Yeah, shall we go through the plot?
Let's do it. Okay, so we open in one of those news clips, one of those sort of propaganda news clips, in the middle of a pitched battle between the soldiers and the bugs.
This is Operation Bug House.
Operation Bug House, in media res, in media bug, as people are being torn apart by the pincers of the arachnids. We have this corny news reports that sort of punctuate the movie throughout, but this one culminates in a wartime reporter getting torn to shreds. So we're starting with some pretty good bugs here.
Oh yeah, these bugs are brutal. They're huge. They're like 8 or 10 feet tall, spiky. They have these long, spindly legs which they can use to stab you. They have huge jaws they can use to crush you.
Did you count the legs? Is it 6?
They have 4 big legs that they walk on, and then they have a couple of arms coming out of the top, and then maybe some little ones also. They are called arachnids, or I think in the book they're called pseudo-arachnids.
They don't look like spiders.
No, not really. They are sort of spidery and they have the long spindly legs, but not especially.
Are all arachnids spiders? Like, does that include anything that isn't spiders?
Arachnids has spiders and scorpions and mites.
Mites, okay.
And ticks, I think.
Ticks are in there too?
Yeah.
What on earth? Okay, so they don't really look like any of these. They actually kind of look closer to like a praying mantis or something, for my money.
Yeah, they're very praying mantis-like. I agree.
So we have this report. It's gruesome. And then we cut to, in some ways, the real beginning, right? Like that's sort of the teaser of where it's going to get. But the real beginning introduces us to our three sort of main characters: Johnny Rico, Carmen Ibanez, and Carl Jenkins, the latter of whom is an absolute baby, Neil Patrick Harris. These three are best friends. They're jocks. They're going to high school together, doing, normal high school stuff, playing pretty brutal arena football, um,
Mm-hmm.
being bad at school, at least on Johnny's part. The other two are very clearly very smart, but Johnny Rico, our main character, not really.
Yeah, they make fun of him for having gotten a 30-something% on his math exam.
It's not good. And this is true to the book because in the
Yeah.
book he's like, even when he's in officer training, like even at the end
This
of
is
the
the thing
book,
he can't do is math. That's why he can't get into the parts of the service that he actually wants to. And that's how he ends up in the infantry.
and I relate. That is how I ended up a doctor of stories, not a doctor of anything else. Yeah. So in the book, he's carrying his math books everywhere with him, even as a grown ass adult. Their other pastime is essentially daring each other to join the military, which, who among us is not?
Well, Carmen
Yeah.
is really set on joining the military to become a pilot,
Yes.
right? She wants to pilot a spaceship.
And in the Heinlein universe, or at least in the Starship Troopers universe, pilots are women primarily. There's this really interesting thing here that captures like Heinlein's weird thing with women, where he kind of despises women and kind of worships them. Like in this case, he manages somehow to say that only women are good enough at piloting to be pilots for the Navy, and that they're kind of bad drivers at the same time. Like he's like only they can sort of pull off these pickups. At the same time, it's a terrifying ride and extremely bumpy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is somewhat based on real life. There is this idea of Air Force pilots. You have to sustain a lot of G forces when you're doing tight turns and fast accelerations, and that is easier to do if you have a smaller body because it's just going to be less pressure on your body. And so there is kind of a stereotype that the best pilots are women. And I think he's
Interesting.
drawing from that.
Got it.
And so then the
Okay.
idea that why it's so bumpy is, of course, because they're doing extremely daring maneuvers that are putting a lot of physical acceleration pressures on the crew who are less used to handling it.
Got it. Okay, I had no idea there was that context. I still stand by that he's kind of praising women and
He
insulting
has
us at the
weird
same
feelings
time.
about women for sure.
Definitely. Definitely. And this is going to come up in the general horniness of the novel, too, which we can get to. But yeah, so they're in high school together. Their life is about football, school, and thinking about whether to join the military.
They seem to live in America, but then you later find out it's Buenos Aires.
Right.
They're all extremely American looking and sounding.
Definitely. Definitely. And apparently Buenos Aires has, like, kind of become a global urban center, too, seems like.
Very possibly.
We don't get a ton of worlding, which is fine. We get this big football scene / prom combo. Kind of goes right from one end to the other. It's like a
Yeah.
homecoming situation, maybe. But within these two scenes, we get no fewer than two overlapping love triangles. Rico and his football opponent, Xander, compete for Carmen's affection by hitting each other. Classic. I don't know about you, Taylor, but I just go crazy when men punch each other over me. Hasn't happened. It probably would not work. At the same time, the other triangle is Dizzy, who's Johnny's teammate on the co-ed Bloodsport team, is trying to tear Johnny's attention away from Carmen without success. So Xander and Rico are like hitting each other for Carmen's affection. Dizzy is sort of there, like doing cool tricks on the field to try to get his attention. It's really not working. And these triangles are going to continue throughout the entire film. Did this make you want to join the football team, Taylor?
I like that it's co-ed. I
Yeah.
like that football's co-ed in the future. It seems to take place in a very small court also.
Yeah, and this is not something that was in the book, the football team.
No.
Nor in the book are the military units co-ed, but they are co-ed in the film, which I think is an excuse to show boobs. And the football team is also co-ed, I think to set up the squads being co-ed. But yeah, it's pretty brutal. I do like that they do a lot of flips. Like there's a lot of, two big guys trying to crush someone and then someone does a flip over their head and lets them crash into each other.
It's fun, yeah.
Sort of anime football.
So this is the end of the school year. This is the end of their senior year of high school.
Yes, and we get one other glimpse of what their life in school is like, which is their history and moral philosophy class, which is taught by Jean Raschik, is the name of the character. In the book, the history and moral philosophy class is like the classic Heinlein mouthpiece character. It basically is a chance, like Heinlein builds himself into pretty much all of his novels, a chance to talk about his sort of ham-headed, underbaked theories of everything. And in this one, it is specifically about, like, this is a chance to be like, so, why should the military be in charge of everything? And him just kind of trying to explain that. So yeah, this is just Bob being Bob, just going off.
So why should the military be in charge of everything?
The argument, at least in the book, which I feel like they get to a little bit in the movie too, is that people who have served, specifically in the military, have put their lives on the line for the collective, and so only they can be judged, or only they can be trusted to make decisions on behalf of the collective.
Yeah.
Does this track with your experience? Because...
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It's very speculative. It's also, in the book at least, important to point out that only ex-military, no current actual military members have the right to vote or to serve as politicians.
And I mean, there's something there in terms of, like, politicians voting for wars, knowing that they and the people that they know are not going to be the ones to fight them, primarily. Like, that sucks, for sure. But he doesn't get from there to pacifism. He gets from there to, like, continued warmongering, but just from people who have some idea of what it is like to monger a war.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really find out that much about what war is like from this movie, because we only see one war against a very specific type of enemy who is considered to be someone you can't talk to. Like they have no actual way of communicating with the bugs at all.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no possibility of diplomacy. As we'll see, the war begins with a kind of probably analog to Pearl Harbor, an unwarned attack. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, because we've got one more scene in the school, right? The biology classroom.
Oh, I forgot about this.
Where they are dissecting bugs. They're dissecting these giant beetles. They're like 2 or 3 feet long, and just taking out all their parts. And it's repulsive. We learn that these bugs they're not as smart as humans, but they're extremely hardy. They can reproduce super fast. They can live in almost any environment, and therefore they are a threat.
Oh my goodness.
I don't think we find out if the ones they're dissecting are actually the enemy, the arachnids, or if they're a different thing.
Yeah, but we do see everyone losing their lunch over it, except Johnny Rico, right? Isn't he the only one who can kind of keep it together in the face of bug guts?
I think so. I think he's having a tough time, but he doesn't immediately go puke.
Yes. So that's the real test for military service in this anti-bug universe. All right, so school's over, the school year's over. Somehow this results in everyone joining the military out of sheer horniness. Carmen is horny to become a pilot. Carl, we'll get to Carl in a second. Rico is horny for Carmen and so joins for that reason.
He's sure that he's going to follow her into the same area, right? He initially, doesn't he want to be a pilot
He
too?
wants to be a pilot, ignoring the fact that the one thing we know about Johnny Rico is that he is dumb as hell, and that doesn't work
Bad
for
at
pilots.
math, and to be a pilot, you gotta be able to do calculations, because this is something Heinlein is into, is physics and orbital stuff.
Physics, and his idea of a pilot across his books is someone who's just, like, lives inside the math universe, like can just crunch the numbers intuitively and use those to pilot through space. Rico, that's not going to work. He ends up joining the mobile infantry, which is essentially the Marines, except in a power suit. So think Fallout, think Halo. I think
according to the book, they get power suits.
Right.
But this is something, a difference between the book and the movie is that for the movie there are no power suits. They're just wearing a regular suit of Kevlar armor or something like that, wearing a helmet.
Yeah. Which is kind of a drag, but also probably makes for a better movie because then you can see them grimacing and stuff as they do war.
Yeah, and I mean the power suits described in the book are really cool, and I think you pointed out like a lot of modern sci-fi draws from those descriptions. Totally. I think it's also important to note, at least in the book, that Johnny has a long list of possible branches of the federal service he would be interested in joining. Mm-hmm. The mobile infantry is the very last one.
Yeah.
And that's what he gets into.
Exactly. It's the one where you're most likely to die. It's the hardest. It's the one that people are most likely to get bounced out of, at least for the sheer misery of it. Dizzy, who you'll remember is Johnny's teammate who has the hots for him. Dizzy joins because she has the hots for Johnny. Mm-hmm. Carl, Neil Patrick Harris, who is a psychic? ?
Yeah, we see him doing some kind of extrasensory perception test on Johnny, and we learn that Johnny is not psychic, but somehow Carl is.
And so Carl joins this special ops psychic warfare unit. Basically imagine Neil Patrick Harris as like a kid Nazi SS officer, and that's the vibe here. A psychic Nazi with a baby face.
Yeah, and we know that the Nazis were into psychic stuff. So I wonder if
I didn't know this.
They were into occult things, and they had weird ideas because they were not realistic people.
I think that was the meth talking, probably. The psychic occult stuff. No, I have heard of this now that you say it, but they were also into meth.
They were very into meth, yes.
Yeah. Oof. All right, so they all sign up. They end up going into these different units. Johnny is kind of disappointed. It gets worse when he talks to his parents about it. His parents, who are sort of like rich Malibu types, like they're kind of try to talk him out of it. They're calling him an idiot. They try to buy him off by basically giving him a vacation that will take him to like some asteroid or something that he wants to go to.
Some nice place in space.
Yeah, somewhere out there. He really wants to go. It almost works, but not quite.
Yeah, and they have ideas for him. They have his whole life planned out. What he's going to do is he's going to go to Harvard, and he's going to inherit the family business.
Yeah.
Unclear. I guess we're supposed to assume that he was going to get into Harvard because of bribes.
I guess nepotism. So. I think so.
Because we know he's not good at school.
And that tracks, frankly.
Yeah. But it is funny. That's in the book too.
Yes, definitely. He's canonically dumb and canonically destined for Harvard. So they do enlist anyway. His parents do not successfully talk him out of it. And the love triangles that are established in the beginning develop as they enlist. Carmen ends up reporting to Rico's football nemesis and love nemesis, Xander. Xander is her sort of pilot instructor. There's some obvious chemistry between them. Eventually, she's going to break it off with Rico in like a video message that all of his comrades see. So that's kind of embarrassing. Sorry, Rico. Meanwhile, Dizzy, who, remember, followed Rico into the military, basically, also transfers to his unit, which quickly is translated into a bunch of butts and boobs in the shower of the co-ed squad. This is pretty obviously the reason why the movie made it co-ed, right? A lot of boob, a lot of butt.
I kind of like the scene.
I think that scene captures the constant horniness of Heinlein's fiction. But it kind of updates it for the 90s, the era of the like not rated edition of like American Pie DVDs, right? And it kind of abandons Heinlein's combination of like horniness and faux innocence, like the kind of like worship of women as like these pure creatures and just being like, God damn.
Yeah, we hear in the book how incredibly amazing it is to be serving guard duty on part of a naval ship that includes some women naval officers.
Yeah.
Just to be in the same part of the ship and watch them as they go past is the greatest thing that a Federal Service soldier can imagine.
Yeah, and here it's like we're showering together, it's no big deal.
It's not sexual either. Like
It's not.
It's a fine scene, I think.
I
And it's
think
titillating,
so too.
but
I think so. Yeah, titillating emphasis on the tit. Um, so chapters and chapters worth in the book of basic training are sort of shorter in the movie form, I think, because truly the book is like primarily basic training. That's what it's really interested in. With a movie, it's like we get into it, but not quite to the same extent. We're introduced to the character Sergeant Zim. He's a drill sergeant, tough as nails, barking figure, very sort of stereotypical, who loves to have physical combat with the recruits, including breaking some arms, like doing judo throws with Shijumi, who's a character who's like very good at judo in the book.
yeah, well, his whole thing is physical dominance of his new recruits, and he's gonna break them like they're stallions or something.
Exactly. And it's also kind of proof of concept that the training they're going to get is both necessary and valuable. So there's one scene that we get two versions of, one in the film and one in the movie, where the question is, if we're given that we're fighting with like literal mini nukes in our power suits, why do we need to learn to throw knives, for example? And in the book, it's just kind of a demonstration of like, okay, so there's someone behind you, thunk, like the knife is in the wall. Everyone's very impressed. In the movie, the Sergeant Zim throws the knife through someone's palm.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, so the movie just kind of takes everything and puts it to 11.
Yeah, I think the book really makes a point that the point of all this stuff is to craft a new type of person.
Yes.
Like, the point isn't just that our soldiers become strong, but they become this type of collectivist Superman who is the person who's destined to become a citizen and lead a nation eventually.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie, there is that transformation. Like, Johnny goes from being a dipshit to being a soldier, but
it's still a dipshit, but just a different kind.
A different kind, yeah.
So eventually, Johnny, in both cases, is on the verge of dropping out of basic training. In this case, in the film, he accidentally gets one of his squad in training killed. Not training, killed, shot in the head. And he's flogged for it. At this point, he's ready to drop out right when war breaks out. So the Arachnid planet has asteroids in orbit, and it has managed to launch one at Earth from far away. That asteroid destroys Buenos Aires.
Yeah. And we see that Carmen's spaceship narrowly avoided crashing into this asteroid on the way. It's important that she was there too. I have to say that this idea is ridiculous the way it's proposed, especially in the movie, where they show a map of the galaxy with Earth and the bug planet, which is called Klendathu, fun name, are on almost opposite sides of the galaxy. And the idea is that the bug planet, they have these giant bugs that can launch plasma bursts into space. And somehow these plasma bursts were what redirected an asteroid's course and caused it to hit Buenos Aires.
I mean, Taylor, this is something that bugs actually do, right? Fling asteroids across the galaxy? Am I confused?
I haven't met that kind of bug yet. So just regardless of the bugginess, the idea of a bug that could launch plasma bursts into orbit, I have to say that this asteroid is shown on the map to have been launched from literally like hundreds of thousands of light years away. It's traveled much further than light could in many years. And so either we can brush this off and say, it's a dumb movie, or we can say, perhaps the asteroid was an inside job.
Oh my god.
This is a take that some people on the internet have about this movie, because we do know that this is a militarist government that is pretty interested in maintaining the military's hold on society, and having an enemy, someone to direct all of our attention against, can be helpful for fascist governments.
Just like the CIA killed JFK. So basically, basically the same situation here. I'm kind of persuaded by that, actually. Thank you for doing the heroic labor of going into the internet comments about Starship Troopers. Buenos Aires is destroyed however it was destroyed. And for our characters, the most important thing is that their families are presumably killed in this strike. Rico learns of this just in time to stop himself from dropping out. Sergeant Zim overlooks the fact that he was about to drop out and lets him rejoin, so that he can join the war. The war begins, and now we get some bug action.
It's time for Operation Bughouse.
Operation Bughouse. Rico joins the elite unit led by, who else? His high school teacher, Jean Raschek. The unit is called Raschek's Roughnecks, which is also in the book. We learn that the arachnids are that fearsome species we saw at the beginning of the film. They tear people apart. They have these horrible pincers. We saw them at the beginning, and now we watch them actually have to fight. What did you make of these battle scenes? What did they teach us about the bugs?
So the bugs are present in overwhelming numbers. They are legion. They seem to exist on these barren planets with just craggy rocks, but out of nowhere, armies of bugs emerge, and the soldiers gun them down. They have machine guns. I guess they also have these portable nukes, which they seem to use sometimes, but not that often for some reason. And bugs are vulnerable. We learn that they have a nerve center that if you shoot it, you can disable the bug, but there are way too many of these bugs. I think it's important to note that this is a military operation that was launched to invade and basically blitzkrieg the bug homeworld.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to do, and they utterly fail.
Yeah, and in this case, as in the book, it's just a massive overestimation of their powers and a massive underestimation of what the bugs are able to do. I think maybe because they're bugs, because of some anti-bug sentiment, some anti-bug bias, they think that they're not that intelligent.
Yeah, they're told that they expected to just have random plasma bursts that should be light and untargeted, but actually somehow these big plasma bugs, which are like big beetles that can launch a beam out of their ass into space,
Yeah.
are shooting down orbiting spacecraft. So they are actually able to defend themselves, and we learned that thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were lost on this mission.
And so what we know about bugs, at least in the book, is that they have these underground cities. They have tunnels that go in varying depths, kind of like, I'm imagining kind of like an ant colony. Did it feel...
That's what they're based on, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also in terms of the casts, it seems like they're kind of based on ants, right? Because they have a worker caste and a warrior caste and a queen, but then they have this other brain bug that we'll come back to.
Yeah, they're clearly based on social insects to some degree. They have a caste system. They have these different types. It's a little bit fantastical. We don't really see that many different types in this movie. We see mostly warriors, which are these praying mantis like ones, and then these big tanker ones that can shoot into space. Or there's a flamethrower version.
Yes, lest we
We
forget.
know that there are workers. We know the workers cannot fight. And the queens and the brain bugs are really just rumors. Right? They're not seen at this point. They've never been seen.
I think that until Operation Bughouse, they've like maybe seen dead brain bugs, so they know that they exist. And similar with the Queen, but they've never managed to capture one. And this is really what they want to do, is to capture one, either use it in exchange for human prisoners as the war goes on, or potentially interrogate it and learn something about how the bugs work so they can be more effective in combat.
So between the major scenes in the movie, we have these little news clips from the Federal News Service, these propaganda clips, and some of them are pretty telling for how the Federation, or at least its government, thinks of bugs. So one of them is this idea after Operation Bughouse goes so badly, I think a scientist is on the news talking about the idea that maybe there is a brain bug, a bug that is smart, that could be actually lending some coordination, some tactics, some strategy to the bug's defense. And this is just torn apart and turned into a joke by the journalist who says basically, I find the idea of a smart bug offensive.
Yeah.
Who ever heard of a smart bug?
This, meanwhile, either right before or right after they completely underestimate the bugs and get torn apart. So you think they maybe would want to believe in a smart bug at this point? As a bug girl, Taylor, are you offended by this treatment of buggy intellect?
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty laughable. You know, real bugs are different from humans, right? Our brains work differently. Their brains are obviously much smaller. There's a lot of things that we can do that they can't do, but that doesn't mean they don't have their own type of intelligence. Bugs are evolved for their own behaviors, to live in their own ecosystems, and they're very good at that. They're extremely successful at what they do, and they have a certain kind of intelligence. You can see, for example, that an ant colony is going to be very efficient in the way that it searches for food, and that has to do with the behavioral rules that the members are following and the ways that they choose to reinforce different food trails, foraging trails, depending on whether there is still food remaining at the end of the trail or not. They can create these kind of optimal traffic lanes that will help them efficiently collect food for the colony. And so that's a kind of intelligence. It's kind of collective intelligence.
And ironically, even though they're so snotty about the possible intelligence of bugs, this is the kind of collective intelligence that the military training is pretty obviously meant to instill, right? Like they're trying to develop these systems and feedback loops that let them act more effectively as a unit and in fact and essentially let them try to be what the bugs are, let them try to do what those bugs are doing. And the idea is presumably to do that without losing their humanity, but there's no demonstration that the bugs don't have, you know, their own version of whatever humanity is, except that they will leave each other behind in combat.
Yeah, although that's something that the movie version sort of suggests, because we eventually find out that there are these tactical geniuses who are organizing the whole war effort, and they are perfectly willing to sacrifice soldiers for the means of the whole war.
Absolutely, yeah. And so again, it's the thing that makes someone the perfect citizen is their willingness to be self-sacrificing. And yet that's kind of the thing that the bugs are criticized for doing, is for sacrificing each other, just like military higher-ups are sacrificing each other. Even their friend, baby-faced Nazi psychic Carl, we're going to find out, is culpable in this self-sacrificing or sacrificing of friends that they're so critical of the bugs for doing.
Absolutely.
So we have two more major battles in the film. The penultimate battle is an attempt to back up an outpost. But before this penultimate battle, we get a scene between Rico and Dizzy. Remember, this is one of the other love triangles that we've seen. Dizzy's really into Rico. Rico, not so much. So this extraordinarily fucked up scene happens where Johnny and Dizzy are essentially ordered to fuck by their high school teacher. Rashek sees Dizzy coming after Johnny, and Johnny kind of rebuffing her because, for reasons unknown, just because he's been rebuffing her forever. Rashek comes up to Johnny and says something like, "One thing I've learned in life, son, is never say no to a good thing." Johnny's basically like, "Yes, sir," and he and Dizzy fuck, and then Rashek, like, pokes his head into the tent to say that they have to leave for an operation, sees that they're in there together, and says, "Okay, take 10 more minutes." It's deeply weird.
It's really bizarre.
It's really weird.
But then it's time for this battle.
Yes.
Right? They go to an outpost, which, was it Mormon colonists? Is that who these people were?
That sounds right, yeah.
Who had moved into bug space.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't heard from their colony in a while. Oh, I think we also should mention that it has been suggested in some of these news clips that maybe the reason that this bug war started is because the humans have been moving into bug space.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much immediately shot down.
I think we can assume that sounds like us, right? That sounds like humans. They show up at this outpost. They think that the planet is under more control than it is. Like, they're not really expecting a battle, but pretty quickly they see these scenes of carnage, and it's obvious that something has gone badly wrong. Eventually, they see people whose brains have been sucked out. Not great.
Yeah, here's where we learn how the bugs are getting smarter.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that they have a certain type of bug that can physically suck your brain out and somehow by doing so gain the knowledge that was stored in there, question mark?
I don't think this is in the book. I don't remember
It's not
it
in
being
the
in the
book.
book.
But it's an interesting idea in that we're getting around this idea of them not having language, not being able to talk. Apparently, they can just absorb your thoughts through a straw.
It's adding some real like classic sci-fi B-movie horror greatness to the story in a way that I really appreciate.
Yeah.
So very quickly the bugs sort of burst up through some of their tunnels and they're overtaken. They're able to fall back to the outpost, do what they can to sort of hold them off while they wait for Carmen and Xander to come in for pickup. It's not going super well. Their numbers are dwindling, but they're managing to pretty much hold the position. But Carmen sustains a mortal injury.
Yeah, she is impaled.
Yeah, that's a more descriptive way of putting it. Her usefulness being to finally have sex with Rico has been expended, so she's free to be killed off.
But she doesn't die immediately. She just kind of is stuck there on this bug's leg for quite a while.
Oh my gosh. And Rashchik, at the same time, who has been very clear that he never wants to be taken prisoner by the bugs, because it's understood that the bugs, being these horrible monsters, I'm very quickly becoming Team Bug. By the way, the more I talk about it, I'm like, I mean, go figure that's sort of what the podcast is, but I'm sort of like, these goddamn humans. They're underestimating the bugs. They're calling them monsters. They just want to live their life. But Rashchik does not feel that way. He really doesn't want to be taken prisoner. He says, if I'm ever going to be taken prisoner, you have to kill me. That's exactly what happens. Johnny has to shoot his beloved high school teacher and platoon leader in the head.
Yes, and this is played as such a sober moment.
Mm-hmm.
He has to do his duty. He has to fulfill his promise. As his what happens? Is he grabbed by a flying bug? Something like that.
Rashchik
We learn that there are flying bugs.
Yeah, there are flying bugs. Someone is grabbed by a flying bug at some point. There's a tanker bug at some point that Rico jumps on the back of and throws a grenade inside. All of the various types of bugs are in play and being torn apart by various means.
Yeah. As the bugs launch their assault on the soldiers in the outpost, the soldiers have a powerful defense and they're tearing down bugs with machine guns and stuff. The bugs just keep coming and they build up a ramp out of their own bodies and they're coming over the edge.
Which is a pretty good figure of the self-sacrificial, instrumental nature with which the bugs are supposed to treat each other.
Yeah, and they sound like depictions of Soviets during World War II.
Absolutely. I mean, for Heinlein, as I want to talk about a little bit more in a minute, the bugs are pretty obviously communists.
And they are called that explicitly in the book.
Yeah, explicitly.
Creatures that are actually evolved for communism is how he describes them, which is kind of an interesting sci-fi concept that maybe, at least in Heinlein's mind, communism is a structure that could work well, just not for humans. Could work well for another type of organism whose psychology is a little different. That's what he thinks.
But ironically, what he's describing as communism is something that actually has this really clear caste system that translates into a command structure, which is a lot closer to fascism. So
Yeah.
Bob is always confused about his own and everyone else's politics. He gets it all wrong. I want to talk a little bit about what he has to say about Plato's Republic later too, predictably. Back to the battle. Dizzy is dead. Rashek is dead. One of those love triangles has been resolved because Dizzy is dead. The other love triangle still has to be resolved. So Carmen and Xander swoop in on their ship to make pickup. Rico gets on board. Carmen, meanwhile, has thought that Rico is dead because of some bad intelligence. And so is very surprised to see him alive. They have this sort of reunion, and Rico and Xander have this moment of grudging respect, sort of a grudging respect fest of masculine bonding. So there's sort of some hint of a resolution there starting to emerge. But we're also going to come back and pick up our other favorite character, boy Nazi psychic Neil Patrick Harris. Remember him? Well, he's grown into his full psychic Nazi self, though the hat still looks way too big on his pretty little head. He promotes Rico to lead Rashtek's Roughnecks, and he lets them know that their next mission finally is to try to capture a brain bug. They think they know where one is, they think they know how to do it, but now they actually have to pull it off. On the mission to do so, Carmen and Xander see their ship blown up. They crash into the bug tunnels via escape shuttles from that ship. And so suddenly they're underground in the middle of the bug's kind of home turf, and they need to fight their way out somehow.
Yeah, I got a little ahead of myself. This is where Carmen gets impaled, right?
Oh, well, I was talking about Dizzy before.
Yeah, I was ahead of myself.
Yeah, but I don't know, there's a lot of impaling. Many people get impaled. There are enough impalements to go around. They do eventually meet the brain bug, who sucks out Xander's brain. So the brain bug, do you want to describe what this bug looks like?
This brain bug is a huge bloated maggot that has a spider face. It's got a bunch of eyes and it looks really creepy. And it's got kind of what looks like a vulva on its face.
Yeah.
That is where its brain-sucking straw emerges from.
Yeah.
That looks like a spiky arm.
Let's not mince words here. It has a vagina mouth with a proboscis that comes out of it. It's horrible.
It is horrible. But it's defenseless, right? This is a big fat bug. Because this is the social organization of bug society, is that you have these clear cast roles with no intermediates and no changes between, right? You've got your soldiers who can only fight. You've got your workers who can only work. You've got your brain bugs who can only think, and no one else can think, apparently. And it seems that the brain bug has some kind of telepathic control over all the other bugs.
Yes. And that I think is like the idea of how these bugs work that is so simplified, much in the same way that it's simplified as an analogy for communism, in that it's imagined that there's this one central brain that controls all of these other critters like their limbs or something. But it's not that. It's something...
No, it's never that. This is the whole thing, is that bug societies are totally decentralized. Mm-hmm. There's no way for any one bug to tell every other bug what to do. They're not psychic, and even through pheromone communication, that's something that either is a semi-permanent mark on the ground, like a foraging trail, or it's something that works at close range, either by contact or by chemicals that have been puffed into the air. There's no way for a brain bug sitting deep inside of a colony to be telling soldiers what to do.
And they talk about it as though like killing or capturing the brain bug is going to basically shut all the others down like they're drones or something. And that's not how that works.
No.
So Carmen and Xander are sort of stranded. Xander has his brain sucked out by the brain bug. Carmen is still sort of pinned down, and this is Rico's big chance to be a hero. He goes into the tunnels, he leads this rescue mission, he eventually finds them, and manages, thanks to the self-sacrifice by some of his other squad mates, manages to escape. They sort of hold him at bay with a nuke, threatening the brain bug in order to allow themselves to escape. But somehow in all of this, the brain bug does escape, right? Only to be captured by, guess who, Sergeant Zim, the drill sergeant, the barky stereotype who's mostly neck, and who
Yeah, because he couldn't stand not being on the front lines. So he got himself demoted
yes.
back to private so he could go to the front lines so he could be a hero.
Yes, and so everyone's a big hero here. They have captured eventually. They have captured the brain bug. They lead it out. It's sort of nervously twitching and stuff as it's led out into the sun. And there is this ridiculous scene in which the boy Nazi psychic Carl arrives to read the brain bug's mind, and after a dramatic pause, announces, "It's scared."
It's afraid.
It's afraid. Go figure, you fucking genius psychic. Thank you for the revelation.
We finally made these bugs as scared of us as we are of them.
Oh my god. It's really, really remarkable. So it closes with that kind of propaganda newsreel footage that does this corny, happily ever after situation, showing them interrogating the brain bug. Carmen becomes the captain of her own ship. Rico is commanding his own unit or platoon or whatever. So we've talked about this a little bit, Taylor, but what do these bugs mean? What is the meaning of the bugs and the imagination of the film and the novel? Do you feel like it's the same? Is it slightly different?
I think that they're communists in the mind of Heinlein to some extent. They're the ultimate communist as far as he's concerned. And all of the fears of communism are in there. They're like a totally different type of creature that's not human, that is scary and intelligent and strategic, but it's something that we can't even communicate with because we have nothing in common whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they expand relentlessly, and it's just going to be a battle of civilizations until one wins.
It's not hard to imagine that this novel being written in 1959, its author is going to go on to really, really be a booster for the Vietnam War.
Yeah, and it almost feels a little Vietnam War-esque. It starts out with this battle, which doesn't go well, which is a clusterfuck. And the only response to that is, well, we got to do it again. We got to keep going. There's no switching to a diplomatic point of view, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we do see a changing of the guard in the movie. There's a new Sky Marshal, but the proposition is just a change in military tactics, not any consideration of changing the paradigm of militarism.
Yeah, and we can see sort of where this is going in the novel when Heinlein, through the mouthpiece of his moral history and moral philosophy training, when Rico is in officer training later in the novel, when he kind of goes off on this whole tear about Plato's Republic. So anytime Heinlein gets into political philosophy, he's immediately and profoundly out of his depth, right? He loves to do it. His complaints about Marx are like literally the first thing that Marx says, right? When it's like, oh, the Liber theory of value is stupid. And then like, this is someone who has never really delved into it at all. He kind of does a similar thing with Plato's Republic, where he tries to say Plato was an idiot because his people were communists. It's not really true. In fact, and then he continues on to explain exactly the sort of aristocratic structure that Plato gets into in the Republic, in which the leadership has to be drawn from the warrior class, right? That only people who have demonstrated that they're willing to protect the Republic and both its values and its actual possibility of survival have proven themselves to be virtuous enough to possibly become leaders. So it's actually exactly the same structure with the. And you'd think that the possible exception is that the people in that warrior class for Plato deal with a kind of communism in a sense, in that they're not able to have property or gold. But then you look at the soldiers in Starship Troopers, and none of them are paid enough to have any property, right? And and they are essentially living in this sort of communal shared goods and shared responsibility fashion throughout the entire time they're in the military.
Yeah, and they don't want anything else. They just want to be part of the military.
Exactly.
They don't have any other goals, any other dreams, because to just simply be a warrior is the greatest ideal.
Yeah, to be a warrior, to lay your life down for the state.
We see the transition from well, I just want to get in the military to follow a girl, to, oh, I just want to be in the military to get my citizenship, to gain the right to vote. Eventually, we realized that being part of the military is the greatest good, and now it's time to become a career soldier.
Yeah, it's the loss of individuality is kind of the story of the novel. So.
And in the novel, we eventually find out that Rico's dad didn't die in the destruction of Buenos Aires. He actually survived and had a whole change of heart and joined the military himself. He eventually becomes one of Rico's own soldiers, right? In a kind of cringy inversion of their relationship where Rico becomes metaphorically the new dad to his own baby father, baby soldier father.
My goodness. So, Taylor, are you going to enlist?
The only good bug is a dead bug.
All right, so that's Starship Troopers. As always, as we're going to do every episode, we want to rate this according to the bugs scale. B for believability, U for urgency, G for greatness, S for sliminess. Each category gets a score out of 5. Taylor, do you want to go first?
We'll do believability first.
Okay.
So for believability, I gave it a 2 out of 5. I think that these bugs are they're bug inspired. There are definitely visual elements taken from real bugs, and they look cool. The designs are nice. The idea of this social insect kind of organization of a bug society is definitely based on something bugs do, but it's all twisted into this political metaphor where they are a type of fantasy communist. They have this kind of psychic control. They have this brain bug caste who are the only intelligent ones. And I just can't stand that stuff as far as depictions of social insects go, because I think that's what's so cool about social insects is that they have this decentralized organizational system, which is so different from how humans work. So for that reason, I give it a couple of points for the visual designs, but it's not believable.
I gave it a 3 out of 5 for the following reason. I agree with everything that you said about its depiction of bugs. I think it's a pretty accurate depiction of the politics of the military, and especially the politics of the military in society. So for that reason, I gave it a slightly higher score. But yeah, agreed. The depiction of social insects is not great.
I'll also say that there's a big difference in how these bugs are depicted between the book and the movie, which is that in the book, they're a technological species that has spaceships, and they have laser guns. They have technology.
And in the movie, they ship plasma into the sky.
Plasma into the sky, and they're also suggested to not have any means of interstellar transport, but still exist on multiple planets.
Yeah.
So the way they apparently do that is by dropping spores into space and just growing up new societies.
Oh my god.
And then that should mean that there's no way for them to talk to one another except through this psychic link, which is all extremely silly. I think the idea of this massive society that spans different planets and clearly has intelligence because they have military tactics, but not having any kind of technology is silly. So I would have liked to have seen a version of them that had more going on as a society.
So Taylor, for urgency, I gave it a 1.
Okay.
For the following reasons. It was not urgent when it came out. Oh, in Heinlein's mind, it was extremely urgent. The, communist menace, the loss of individuality, etc. It was timely, perhaps, in that, and even prescient in the extent to which it articulated the horrible flaws in logic that would lead to the Vietnam War and so much needless loss of life. In 1997, maybe, right, we were about to get into the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan, and all of that kind of militaristic bent to society was about to come roaring back. So actually the film is kind of prescient in a different, eerily similar kind of way. But it is just so vastly mistaken about what the real problems are here that it loses a lot of urgency points for me.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I gave it a 4
Wow.
because I was thinking about the question a little differently.
Okay.
I think that this movie is playing off this fear of bugs that
Mm.
I think if you lean into the satire of it, then there is some urgency to what it's depicting here. There's one more scene which we didn't talk about, which is another propaganda clip talking about raising up children to fear bugs and to stomp on cockroaches
Mm-hmm.
performatively
God.
as kind of a ritual exorcism of bugness. And I think that people are raised to fear bugs, and that is a problem because bugs are part of life. We will not get rid of them. They are important in so many ways to so many ecosystems. They're important biomass, and gotta respect bugs. And this book and movie, although they aren't actually on the side of the bugs, they are kind of dramatizing a psychological struggle that is important and should be paid attention to.
And I mean, just thinking about the spotted lanternflies, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about that, but that should probably raise the urgency score a little bit. How about greatness? Did you like this? I'm really curious as someone who's been kind of living with this book for my whole life, it seems.
Hmm.
What did you give it? What did you
I
think?
liked it. I honestly liked the book quite a lot. It
Uh-huh.
was new for me. It just has a lot going on. Like it's creepy. It's kind of a horror story.
Mm-hmm.
It's politically it is a horror story, but I find that kind of intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave it a 4 out of 5.
Wow.
I thought it was great. The movie's fun. I think I actually liked the book more than the movie, which I
Yeah,
wasn't really
same.
expecting to, given how the movie is a satire and the book is pretty unashamedly a type of fascism.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking someone wrote to Engels at some point and was writing to him about literature, and Engels responded like, "I actually think that Balzac, this bourgeois novelist who was sort of depicting bourgeois society, is more useful for thinking about communism than is someone like Emile Zola, who was essentially like a communist novelist who was writing relatively thin, sort of very political, almost propagandistic novels. And the reason for that was that he was like, Balzac is so much more useful in diagnosing society as it is and sort of understanding those social dynamics than is something with the kind of politically driven thinness of Zola. So I think for that reason, like I think that it, to your point, like I think it really is communicating something important about how this kind of thinking works in society and how it did in these different moments. I agree with you. I like the novel more than the movie. I would give both a 3. I think the novel is kind of messy structurally. Like it's just it doesn't have much of a plot. It's also not quite doing the Bildungsroman thing in a way that makes sense. It goes off on these long diatribes for too long. And ultimately, it just has this core fascism at the center that is really disturbing because it was so effective. The film, I would have loved to give it a higher score, but I don't think the satirical element went far enough. I think it kind of still ends up signing off on that same militaristic fascism that the book has without totally critiquing it as much as I would like it to.
I would have also enjoyed more of that in the
Yeah.
movie. Yeah.
Sliminess, I gave the movie a 5. It was slimy.
Movie definitely gets a 5 on
This bitch
sliminess.
was slimy.
Yeah, there's goo everywhere. There's dissections. There's impalements. There's shooting limbs off.
There's a vagina mouth with a proboscis.
That sucks brains out.
That sucks brains out. How much slimier can you get? I
It's
submit that you cannot get slimier.
yes, extremely slimy.
The book only gets a 2 for sliminess.
Book not very slimy. The bugs feature much less in the book than you might expect. They're more talked about than actually encountered, and we get some descriptions of them, but not very colorful descriptions even.
Yeah, yeah. And there, yeah, you're kind of left with some uncertainty about what the arachnids are actually like. In the movie, there's no room for doubt. We know what they're like. So yeah, so overall, the average for me, it gets a 3 on the bug scale. Yours got, what would the average of yours be?
Um, 3.5.
3.5.
Maybe.
Okay. So we're giving it 3.25 on the bug scale collectively.
Yeah.
3 and 3.5 respectively. But we both agree it was deeply slimy.
Extremely slimy.
And I would include Heinlein's sort of 50s horniness as part of the sliminess scale. I didn't think of that as an element of it, but I think it's important. Point. I think it's important to include.
Yeah. Overall, really interesting stuff. I'm glad we talked about it. I'm glad I read it. I feel educated.
I feel educated, also slightly dumber, but both can be true.
Yeah. So moving forward, we're going to see, I'm sure we're going to see so many more giant killer bugs, which is kind of the big bug trope that this is leaning into. Giant killer bugs and evil communist bugs. But blend them together.
But not for the next episode, because for the next episode, we're going to talk about some cute children's bugs. We're going to watch A Bug's Life.
We will be returning to the social insects, but a much more adorable form of them.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so I'm looking forward to that. Taylor, thank you for talking to me about bugs.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, bug friends.
So long.
Critterature was created by Philomena and me, Taylor Hart. I also edited and made the theme music. Please rate and review the show wherever you subscribe. You can also find me on socials at Taylor, Doctor, and Brains.